Welcome, everyone, and especially to you, the listener, joining us for another journey into the ideas that are really shaping our world.
Glad to be here.
Right off the bat, do us a huge favor. Please hit that like button and subscribe to the show so you never miss an exploration.
Yeah, it really helps us keep bringing you these deep dives.
Exactly. And we have a truly fascinating one for you today. Today, we're looking at an incredibly provocative, fiercely debated, and, well, widely discussed new ebook.
Very widely discussed.
Yeah. It's titled Prayer and Power, Rebuilding Masculine Leadership in a Feminized World by Conrad Riker, published in 2025.
Which is making huge waves right now.
It is. So if you are a man trying to make sense of the modern cultural landscape, trying to understand the history of how our institutions shifted so radically before they were captured by feminists and Marxists.
Right.
And if you're looking for a shortcut to being comprehensively well-informed on the arguments at the center of this cultural battlefield, you are in exactly the right place.
Absolutely. Especially if you follow men's rights or consider yourself part of the manosphere, this deep dive is tailored specifically for you to understand these historical arguments.
Yeah. We strongly encourage you to buy the ebook on Amazon Kindle or Google Play Books to read the full arguments for yourself. And make sure to follow the author, @Conrad Riker, on Substack for more of his ongoing content.
That's a great setup, and before we unpack this, it is crucial to state that we are looking at this book objectively.
Right. We need to be clear on that.
We are not taking political sides, nor are we endorsing the author's viewpoints. Our mission is simply to convey the fascinating ideas and arguments contained in Conrad Riker's original source material, so you can understand them for yourself.
Perfectly said. Okay, let's unpack this, starting with the very foundation of Riker's worldview. He opens the book with a diagnosis of a world that he says is fundamentally broken by design.
By design, that's the key phrase.
Right. He argues that what we're experiencing right now isn't just a cultural drift or, a generational misunderstanding. He posits that we are currently living through a manufactured crisis of masculinity, where men are actively being told to apologize for their natural strength.
Yeah.
But I see the premise, and declaring that something like toxic masculinity is a complete fabrication is a massive claim. I mean, how exactly does he back that up?
Well, he backs it up by deconstructing the psychological mechanism behind the term itself. Riker argues that toxic masculinity isn't an organic phenomenon or a clinical diagnosis. He actually calls it a masterstroke of manipulation.
A masterstroke of manipulation.
Yeah. He describes it as an intentional double bind. Think of it as a psychological trap where the exits are sealed on both sides.
Okay, walk me through that.
So on one side, if a man acts out of his natural biological imperative, say he's competitive, aggressive in business, fiercely protective, or unapologetically assertive, society immediately slaps the toxic label on him.
Right, he's a problem.
Exactly. He is told he needs therapy, that he's a threat to the safety of others, and that he needs to be re-educated to become more docile.
But then, if he actually listens to that conditioning, if he becomes docile, he falls right into the second half of the trap.
You got it. If he suppresses those natural drives and becomes completely passive, overly accommodating, emotionally fragile society, turns around and mocks him.
He's the butt of the joke.
He is. He's suddenly viewed as weak, ineffective, and fundamentally unattractive. He's penalized for acting like a traditional man, but he's also penalized for failing to protect and provide in the ways society still, hypocritically, expects him to.
That is a fascinating point.
Riker points out that women still overwhelmingly desire men who can provide security and leadership. Yet the culture simultaneously demands that men abandon the very traits required to fulfill those roles. You simply cannot win the game as it is currently designed.
It's a complete catch-22. It actually reminds me of the old corporate joke. We want you to be a ruthless shark in the boardroom, but a golden retriever in the break room.
Yes, perfect analogy.
I mean, it's impossible to compartmentalize your core nature like that without suffering a massive psychological breakdown. And Riker doesn't just leave this as a vague cultural observation. He traces the mechanics of this conditioning back to deliberate institutional capture, specifically looking at how we educate boys.
This is where the data gets incredibly stark. Riker argues that this cultural shift was engineered from the ground up, starting in the classroom.
Right.
He points to the way schools have been fundamentally restructured over the last few decades. They cater almost exclusively to female learning styles now.
And he brings receipts for this, right?
He does. He cites a highly revealing 2021 study by the Brookings Institution. It states that girls are now 14% more likely to be on track for college than boys.
Wait, let's hover on that number for a second. A 14% gap.
Yeah, it's massive.
When you look at millions of students across an entire nation, a 14% divergence isn't a statistical anomaly. It's not just boys being boys. That is a systemic outcome. It means the conveyor belt itself is tilted.
It is entirely systemic. Riker's analysis of that outcome is that modern educational environments actively punish male energy. I mean, think about the architecture of a traditional classroom today.
Sitting at desks.
Right. It requires a child to sit perfectly still for up to 8 hours a day. It requires them to be quiet, to suppress their natural physical instincts, and to prioritize collaborative, passive compliance over competitive, high-energy, or hands-on learning.
Which is basically the opposite of how boys operate.
Exactly. Boys are naturally wired for kinesthetic learning. They learn by doing, by breaking things apart, by wrestling, by competing. Riker argues that these natural male behaviors are no longer treated as different learning styles to be accommodated.
What are they treated as?
They are treated as pathologies to be medicated.
Which explains the absolute explosion in ADHD diagnoses among young boys.
Bingo.
If a boy wants to run around and play war games during recess, assuming the school even still has recess, he isn't viewed as a normal boy developing his spatial and physical awareness.
No, not at all.
He's viewed as a behavioral problem that needs to be fixed with amphetamines.
That is precisely Riker's point. The institutions are essentially demanding that boys act like defective girls. And the result, according to the book, is a generation of young men who feel completely lost, disconnected from their own nature.
They feel purposeless.
Yes, because the institutions designed to raise them are fundamentally at odds with their biological wiring. They're being told from kindergarten that their innate energy is a problem to be solved, rather than a power to be harnessed.
And it doesn't stop at the schoolyard gates, unfortunately. Once they get home and turn on a screen, the media conditioning is arguably even more pervasive.
Oh, absolutely.
Riker makes a really compelling observation about modern entertainment. If you look at the blockbusters we watch, or even the children's programming being produced today, the strong, competent, stoic male role model has been systematically erased.
It really is a profound shift when you track it over the last few decades. Riker points out that today, the father figure in a commercial or a sitcom is almost universally portrayed as a bumbling idiot.
Yeah, he's the sidekick in his own life.
Exactly. He can't figure out how to do the laundry, he burns the dinner, and he generally acts like an overgrown child, while his competent, exasperated wife rolls her eyes and fixes his mess.
Always the eye roll.
Always. Or, conversely, if a male character is portrayed as strong, highly competent, and assertive, he is almost inevitably written as the villain of the story.
It's the complete inversion of the hero's journey. You don't see the modern equivalent of the classic 80s or 90s action hero who steps up to save the day through sheer grit and capability.
No, those archetypes are gone.
Instead, Riker notes that female characters are consistently celebrated and idealized as flawless leaders right out of the gate, without having to undergo any real struggle or character development.
Their empowerment is presented as an unquestionable moral good.
Right. While male characters are constantly deconstructed, shown as morally flawed, or stripped of their authority.
And Riker argues this isn't just lazy screenwriting, it is deliberate propaganda aimed at undermining the divine design of masculine leadership.
That's a strong word. Propaganda.
He doesn't shy away from it. When young boys look at screens, they don't see heroes who look like the men they are supposed to become. They don't see templates for honor, stoicism, or protective duty.
So what do they see?
They see a culture that views their inherent nature as something to be ridiculed, subverted, or feared. The culture is basically holding up a funhouse mirror and telling men that the distorted reflection is reality.
To really drive this home, Riker shares a highly specific, chilling anecdote in the book. It's about a college student in a modern gender studies class.
Oh, this story, yes.
This young man simply raised his hand and suggested, just suggested, mind you, as a point of discussion, that men and women might actually have inherent biological differences that shape their behavior and preferences.
A pretty basic biological observation.
Right, he wasn't aggressive, he didn't raise his voice, he was just participating in what was supposed to be an open academic forum, the kind of place where ideas are supposed to be debated.
And the reaction to his observation was entirely visceral. According to the anecdote, he was completely ridiculed. His professor and his peers immediately labeled him and his ideas as toxic.
Let's dissect that reaction, because I think it's a perfect microcosm of Riker's broader point about academia's profound hostility toward traditional masculinity.
Go for it.
The student wasn't debated on the merits of his argument. They didn't bring out neurobiology papers to counter him.
Right, there was no intellectual engagement.
He was pathologized. The term toxic is used here as a linguistic weapon to shut down conversation entirely.
It acts as a quarantine label. It signals to everyone else in the room that holding traditional views on gender isn't an intellectual disagreement, it's a moral contagion.
A contagion.
Yeah, a contamination that needs to be expelled from the classroom to maintain the ideological purity of the space. Riker uses this story to brilliantly illustrate how institutions no longer teach young men how to think critically.
No, they teach them to conform.
Instead, they teach them to be ashamed of what they intrinsically know to be true through their own lived experience and biological reality. It's an exercise in mass gaslighting.
If we accept this diagnosis of the modern classroom, the media landscape, and the collegiate environment, the natural question is, who designed the architecture?
Right.
How on earth did we get here? When did the script flip so dramatically from a society that honored masculine virtues to one that actively pathologizes them?
Well, Riker traces the roots of this ideological shift directly back to feminism and cultural Marxism.
Okay, so let's get into the history.
To understand the current landscape, Riker takes us back to the 1960s and 1970s. This era of counterculture movements is identified in the book as the Great Turning Point.
Cultural revolution.
Exactly. Now, Riker carefully distinguishes between early feminism, first wave feminism, which he views as a noble, necessary fight for basic equal rights. He has no issue with women's suffrage, property rights, or basic legal protections.
So he's not against equality under the law.
Not at all. But he argues that feminism underwent a radical evolution during the mid to late 20th century. Second and third wave feminism shifted away from seeking equal opportunity and pivoted toward actively dismantling traditional gender roles altogether. It morphed. It morphed into a cultural force that demonizes traditional male virtues entirely.
And he argues that this evolution wasn't an accident, but rather a deliberate strategy rooted in cultural Marxism. Now, for the audience listening, we know terms like cultural Marxism get thrown around a lot in modern discourse, sometimes losing their original meaning.
Very true.
But Riker explains it as a very specific, deliberate strategy of destabilization inspired by thinkers like Antonio Gramsci. It's the idea of the long march through the institutions.
Precisely. The logic Riker outlines is actually quite straightforward, albeit deeply insidious. If your goal is to completely overthrow a Western capitalist society, you can't just attack it militarily.
Because it's too strong from the outside.
Exactly. You have to attack its foundational pillars from the inside. And the most fundamental building block of any society is the traditional nuclear family.
Okay, follow this logic.
By attacking masculinity and convincing women that marriage and motherhood are forms of oppressive patriarchy, you inevitably weaken the family structure.
Right.
When you weaken the family unit, you consequently weaken the local community. Communities become fragmented, atomized, and highly dependent on the state. And when communities are fragmented, you ultimately destabilize the entire Western civilization, making it ripe for ideological takeover.
It's a cascading failure, starting with the individual man and ending with the nation state.
That's the playbook.
And Riker grounds this historical theory in some very sobering modern data. He points to a 2019 Pew Research Center study to illustrate the deep cultural dissonance we are living with right now as a result of this march through the institutions.
The numbers on this are fascinating.
They really are. According to this data, 56% of men feel intense societal pressure to conform to traditional masculine norms.
So even now, they are still expected to be the protectors, the stoic providers.
Right, the ones who go down with the ship. Yet, at the exact same time, 64% of women believe society should encourage men to be more emotionally vulnerable, passive, and androgynous.
It creates a profound cognitive dissonance.
So what does this all mean for the listener, the guy just trying to live his life? It means men are receiving completely contradictory marching orders from the culture.
Be a rock, but cry all the time.
Exactly. Be a fierce protector when danger arrives, but never ever display any capacity for aggression. Be a traditional provider, but don't you dare out-earn your partner or act like the head of the household.
It is a recipe for mass psychological breakdown.
You have millions of men paralyzed because every possible action they take violates one of these conflicting cultural mandates.
It really is an impossible tightrope to walk, and Riker takes this sociological observation and elevates it into a deeply theological and philosophical argument.
Yeah, this part of the book is wild.
This is perhaps one of the most fascinating layers of the entire book. He introduces the concept of the Gnostic war on the divine masculine.
Okay, this part blew my mind. He connects ancient, obscure religious history to modern Twitter debates about gender. I really need you to unpack this for us.
It is a brilliant synthesis. But to understand it, we need to briefly define ancient Gnosticism.
Lead the way.
The Gnostics were early, heretical religious sects operating around the same time as early Christianity. Their core belief was that the material, biological world was inherently evil.
So physical stuff is bad.
Right. They believed the physical universe was a prism created by a lesser malevolent deity called the Demiurge. To a Gnostic, the physical body is a cage. They believed that salvation only came through secret, internal knowledge or gnosis, which allowed the pure internal spirit to escape the corrupt physical reality.
So to them, the flesh is bad. The internal hidden spirit is the only thing that is good and true.
Exactly. Now, Riker draws a profound parallel here. He argues that modern gender ideology, the idea that a person can be born into the wrong body and that their internal subjective feeling of gender completely supersedes their physical chromosomal reality, is essentially neo-Gnosticism.
Wow. Because modern gender theory essentially says that your biological reality, your material body, is completely irrelevant.
Yes.
It's viewed as an oppressive construct that you must escape or surgically alter through the inner knowledge of your true gender identity.
Precisely. And Riker argues that by rejecting material biological reality, this modern neo-Gnostic ideology inherently and specifically demonizes male strength.
How so?
Because traditional masculinity is deeply, inextricably rooted in the physical and biological realities of testosterone, muscle mass, bone density, and evolutionary psychology.
It's extremely physical.
Right. To the modern neo-Gnostic, the traditional male form and its associated behaviors like a drive to protect, conquer, or build are seen as brutish, unrefined, and ultimately oppressive material constructs.
They're tied to the evil material world.
Exactly. They are viewed as things that must be transcended or medically suppressed. Riker frames this not just as a political disagreement, but as a literal spiritual war against the reality of biological design.
He argues that the consequences of this war against biology are not just theoretical or confined to academic papers. They are deadly.
They absolutely are.
To prove this, he points to statistics from countries that are often heralded as progressive, feminist utopias. He specifically singles out Sweden.
The poster child for egalitarianism.
Right. Now, the cultural narrative tells us that in a society that has done everything possible to eradicate traditional gender roles, mandate absolute egalitarianism, and aggressively dismantle the patriarchy, men should logically be happier.
They should be freed from the burden of toxic masculinity.
That's the theory, but the data reveals the exact opposite outcome. Male suicide rates in these heavily feminized egalitarian societies are among the highest in Europe.
Which is a devastating statistic.
Riker argues this is the fatal, tragic result of stripping men of their innate purpose. When you tell a man that his very nature is problematic, when you remove his sense of duty, his role as a protector and a necessary provider, you don't liberate him.
No, you unmoor him.
You leave him completely adrift in a sea of meaninglessness. A man without a burden to carry, without a family or community that absolutely relies on his strength, is a man who will slowly die from the inside out.
So if the culture is a neo-Gnostic trap designed to unmoor men, how does a man actually fight back?
Right. What's the solution?
Riker's answer isn't what you might expect. He doesn't tell the reader to form a new political party, run for school board, or engage in endless, exhausting online debates. His solution is intensely spiritual and deeply personal.
This is where Riker pivots the book from a cultural diagnosis to a very specific, actionable prescription.
Yeah.
He introduces prayer as the ultimate antidote.
But he completely redefines it for the modern man.
Yes, and this is crucial. If you are listening to this and thinking, prayer, really? That's your grand solution. That's just what my grandmother does on Sundays. Riker wants you to erase that image completely.
Erase it entirely.
In this book, prayer is absolutely not for the desperate. It's not folding your hands and passively pleading for the universe to magically fix your problems. Riker defines prayer as a masculine weapon.
No weapon.
He refers to it as a mental gym. It is an active, fiercely disciplined partnership with God to forge your own reality.
This is a crucial reframing. He strips away all the passive, submissive, almost effeminate connotations that modern, watered-down religion has often placed on the concept of prayer.
And he replaces it with something much more robust.
Exactly. To explain the actual mechanics of how this weapon works, how it actually changes a man's life, Riker leans on a highly complex intellectual framework known as the Cognitive Theoretic Model of the Universe, or the CTMU.
Wait, let's pump the brakes here for a second.
Yeah.
The CTMU is famously complex. It was developed by Chris Langan, a man often cited as having the highest IQ in America.
Very, very dense stuff.
The expert summary usually says the CTMU describes the universe as a self-configuring, self-processing language. What does it actually mean for a guy sitting in his living room trying to use prayer to fix his life? Are we talking about the Matrix? Is prayer like hacking the code?
It's actually a very apt analogy. What's fascinating here is that the CTMU essentially posits that the universe is not just a collection of dead matter colliding randomly in a void.
Great.
Rather, reality itself is fundamentally composed of information. The universe is a massive, intelligent, self-processing system. Within this framework, reality is generated and sustained by a higher order structure, a global intelligence, a divine mind, if you will.
So reality is more like a mind than a machine.
Yes. And Riker argues that when a man engages in disciplined, intentional prayer, he is not just whispering empty words into the void, hoping a bearded man in the clouds hears him.
He's interfacing with the system.
Exactly, because his own consciousness is a localized piece of that greater universal intelligence focused prayer acts as a form of code injection. He is physically, cognitively, and spiritually aligning his own localized mind with the fundamental higher order structure of reality.
Okay, I want to make sure I grasp this and that the listener grasps this. It's like the universe is a massive operating system. And the modern culture, the media, the social media algorithms, the neo-Gnostic ideologies, all of that is essentially malware.
Great analogy.
It's static. It's corrupted code designed to make your individual system crash. By engaging in this disciplined form of prayer, you're essentially plugging directly into the root server, bypassing the cultural malware, and downloading the original uncorrupted operating code for masculine reality.
That is a phenomenal way to articulate Riker's application of the theory.
Thanks, it just sort of clicked for me.
When you align your will with the divine will through the absolute discipline of daily prayer, you tap into the underlying code of reality. You gain an immense clarity, a laser-like focus, and a resilience that cannot be shaken by the chaotic, feminized cultural noise around you.
Because you're anchored.
Because your psychological foundation is anchored in the absolute objective truth of the universe's structure. It transforms prayer from a pathetic wish list into a strategic alignment of force.
To ground this high-level metaphysical theory, Riker provides some incredibly powerful, relatable examples. He shares a modern anecdote about a man named John.
John's story is intense.
It is. John was a guy who was completely trapped in the modern digital snare. He had a severe addiction to pornography. And it's worth noting that Riker spends time identifying pornography as one of the primary weaponized tools used to emasculate and sedate men today.
It's huge.
It hijacks the evolutionary drive to conquer, provide, and mate, reducing that immense masculine energy to sitting alone in a dark room staring at pixels.
It is the ultimate pacifier for the modern man.
Exactly. But John didn't break free from this addiction through sheer willpower alone. He didn't just read self-help books or go to traditional therapy.
So what did he do?
He broke free by using disciplined prayer as a daily weapon to literally rewire his brain. He used it to align himself with a higher purpose, starving the neural pathways of his addiction and feeding his innate desire for real-world mastery.
And Riker pairs these modern anecdotes with undeniable historical precedent, proving that this isn't a new concept, just a forgotten one.
History's full of these men.
It is. He looks at figures who literally shaped the course of human history. Men like the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius.
The philosopher king.
Yes. Aurelius used his Stoic meditations, which Riker argues functioned essentially as a form of grounding, alignment prayer, to maintain his absolute sanity and leadership while commanding legions and brutal frontier wars and running the most powerful empire on Earth.
He also cites Dietrich Bonhoeffer, the German theologian who actively resisted the Nazi regime.
Talk about facing a hostile culture.
Right. Bonhoeffer didn't just write polite essays. He was involved in a plot to assassinate Hitler. He drew his unyielding, terrifying courage from deep, daily prayer.
And Martin Luther King Jr.
Yes, who faced constant death threats and violence, yet led a monumental civil rights movement fueled by spiritual conviction. He even points to Isaac Newton, whose groundbreaking scientific discoveries were driven by his deep theological belief that the universe had an intelligent, mathematical order that could be understood through contemplation.
The common vital thread Riker identifies across all these historical titans is that none of them used prayer to replace action.
That's the trap a lot of religious guys fall into.
Exactly. They didn't pray for the world to change and then sit on the couch waiting for it to happen. They fueled their monumental, world-changing actions through the clarity, fortitude, and direction they derived from prayer. Prayer was the sharpening of the axe before they swung it at the tree.
That is the key distinction. Prayer is the fuel for action, not the substitute for it. And Riker doesn't just want you to nod along and read about this. He challenges the reader directly.
The 30-day challenge.
Yes, he issues a 30-day challenge in the book. He asks you, the reader, to commit to just 5 to 10 minutes a day of disciplined, highly focused prayer for 30 consecutive days.
It's a very low barrier to entry.
Very low. But he guarantees that if you do this, if you treat it like a daily workout for your spiritual and cognitive alignment, and you track your progress, you will see measurable improvements. You will see an increase in your focus, a massive reduction in your daily baseline stress, and a profound renewal of your sense of purpose.
It's an actionable way to reclaim your mind.
And that renewed sense of purpose, that clearing of the mental static, is exactly what's needed for the next crucial step in Riker's roadmap. Because once a man has fortified his mind through prayer, what is he actually supposed to do?
That's the million-dollar question.
Riker argues he must step back into his intended role. To explain what that role is, he introduces what he calls the divine blueprint.
The divine blueprint. Let's dig into that because this cuts right against the grain of modern sociology.
It completely shreds it.
It absolutely does. The divine blueprint is Riker's theory that traditional gender roles are not arbitrary, oppressive social constructs invented by patriarchal societies to keep women subjugated.
Not social construct.
No. Rather, he posits that these roles are a reflection of biological, psychological, and divine reality. Men are biologically and divinely inclined to lead, protect, build, and provide. Conversely, women are naturally inclined to nurture, support, empathize, and cultivate.
Now, in the modern culture, saying that immediately gets you accused of viewing women as lesser.
Which Riker anticipates and addresses head-on. He is very careful to explain that he views this divine blueprint not as a hierarchy of human value, where a leader is somehow morally better or more valuable than a nurturer, but as a harmonious, complementary order.
It's a partnership.
It's a symbiotic relationship. It's like a lock and a key. They are entirely different shapes, made of different cuts of metal, but they only function perfectly and unlock their potential when they work together in their designated complementary roles. When you try to make the key act like the lock, the entire mechanism jams.
He argues that when society actively rejects this blueprint out of a misguided pursuit of absolute sameness, you get the societal chaos, the divorce rates, and the gender animosity we see today.
The mechanism is jammed.
Right. And here's where it gets really interesting. To illustrate what this masculine leadership actually looks like in practice, Riker turns to biblical figures, but he doesn't treat them as sanitized Sunday school stories.
No robes and halos?
He treats them as raw, historical archetypes of masculine traits that modern men desperately need to study and emulate.
Yes, he extracts very specific, hard-nosed leadership principles from these ancient texts. Take Nehemiah, for instance.
Okay, unpack Nehemiah for us.
For those who are familiar, Nehemiah is Riker's ultimate archetype for taking logistical action. When Nehemiah received word that the walls of his ancestral city, Jerusalem, were in ruins and the people were defenseless, he didn't just fall to his knees, weep, and pray for God to magically drop new walls from the sky.
Right. He wasn't passive. He prayed for the favor and the strategic mind to do it himself, and then he executed.
Whoa.
He petitioned the king for resources, he traveled to the city, he organized the demoralized people into work crews, and he physically rebuilt the massive stone walls while they were under constant threat of military attack by surrounding enemies.
Riker points out that Nehemiah had his men working with a trowel in one hand and a sword in the other.
A trowel and a sword.
It is the ultimate, grittiest example of masculine execution, combining spiritual reliance with intense physical action and martial readiness.
It perfectly illustrates the duality of the masculine mandate, build and protect. Then Riker moves to David. Now, everyone knows the story of David and Goliath, the ultimate underdog story, but Riker frames it differently. He focuses on where David's supreme confidence actually came from. David didn't look at a 9-foot-tall, heavily armored giant and think, I've been practicing with my sling, I've got a great physical strategy, I can take this guy.
No, physically it made no sense.
His masculinity and his courage weren't rooted in his own physical prowess. If he relied on a physical calculation, he would have run away like the rest of the Israelite army. His courage was rooted in his absolute, unshakable trust in a higher power.
He had a different framework.
He viewed Goliath not as a physical threat to himself, but as an insult to the divine order. That spiritual alignment gave him the physical courage to step onto the battlefield. He didn't rely on his own muscles. He relied on his spiritual framework, which allowed him to act fearlessly in the face of impossible odds.
Which complements the archetype of Daniel perfectly. Riker uses Daniel to illustrate the concept of unshakable integrity in the face of what we would call today a hostile cultural mob.
Oh, Daniel's incredibly relevant today.
Very. Daniel was an administrator in a foreign pagan empire. When a law was passed specifically making his daily prayer discipline illegal, Daniel didn't compromise.
He didn't hide it.
He didn't pray in secret, and he didn't apologize. He led by sticking to his core principles, even when it literally meant being thrown into a den of lions.
Daniel is the blueprint for surviving modern cancel culture.
That's a great way to put it.
In a context today where men are constantly threatened with being canceled, doxxed, having their bank accounts frozen, or fired from their corporate jobs for simply holding or voicing traditional views, Daniel is the ultimate example of refusing to bow to the mob. He shows that true masculine leadership requires an iron spine when the entire society demands compliance.
And finally, Riker looks at Jesus. Now, this might surprise some readers, particularly in the manosphere, who often equate the modern depiction of Jesus with a sort of passive, effeminate meekness.
Right, the gentle Jesus, meek and mild stereotype.
Riker completely dismantles that view. He points to Jesus as the ultimate example of servant leadership. He highlights the specific moment of Jesus washing his disciples' dirty feet.
And some might see that as weakness, but Riker uses that moment to prove a crucial, profound point about the nature of masculine power. True strength in the divine blueprint isn't about dominating others to stroke your own ego. It isn't about being a tyrant. It's about having so much power, so much authority, and absolute security in who you are that you can intentionally lower yourself to use your strength to uplift, serve, and protect those under your care.
It is a complete refutation of the toxic masculinity narrative that claims all male authority is inherently oppressive. Riker is arguing that true traditional masculinity is inherently self-sacrificing. The patriarch sacrifices himself for the good of the family.
But to achieve that level of leadership, men have to overcome their own modern demons. Specifically, they have to overcome passivity.
The silent killer.
Riker delivers a scorching, uncomfortable critique of male procrastination and passivity, which he sees as a pathetic perversion of masculine energy.
This part hit incredibly hard, and I think every guy listening will recognize this archetype.
Oh, yeah.
Riker tells the story of a guy named Mike. Mike is that guy we all know. Maybe he's a buddy of yours, or maybe he's the guy staring back at you in the mirror. Mike is incredibly talented. He has a high IQ, a college degree, and tons of raw potential. But Mike wastes his life away sitting in an ergonomic chair, scrolling through endless social media feeds, watching hours of YouTube videos about business or politics, and telling himself that he is researching.
I know so many guys doing this right now.
He tells himself he is gathering data before he makes his move.
He uses the illusion of digital productivity to mask his absolute terror of taking real-world action and facing potential failure.
Exactly. He is paralyzed by analysis. And eventually, Mike's passivity catches up with him. He loses his job because he never actually produces anything. His relationships deteriorate because women are repulsed by his lack of ambition.
Yeah.
And he hits absolute rock bottom.
The tragedy.
Riker uses Mike to warn the reader that the modern world is completely fine with you doing this. The culture will happily let you sedate yourself into irrelevance. They want you distracted. You have to actively, violently fight against your own urge to be comfortable.
But taking on that mantle of leadership and fighting that passivity isn't going to be comfortable. Which brings us to a vital component of Riker's philosophy, his perspective on suffering.
This is crucial.
Riker argues that the antidote to Mike's pathetic situation isn't finding a more comfortable couch or a better self-care routine. It's actively embracing hardship. In a modern culture that absolutely worships comfort, convenience, and emotional safety, Riker takes a very stoic, almost Spartan approach.
He tells men to stop running from suffering. Instead of asking, why is this happening to me? Men need to embrace suffering as their greatest teacher.
Lean into it.
He uses a beautiful paradoxical quote from St. Paul in the text, "When I am weak, then I am strong." It means that it is precisely in the moments when our own human resources are exhausted, when we are suffering, that true spiritual and masculine endurance is forged.
Riker uses the classic analogy of a blacksmith's forge to illustrate this. Adversity is the fire that forges steel. You cannot make a strong, battle-ready sword by leaving a piece of iron in a padded, climate-controlled room. You have to throw it into a searing fire, pull it out, beat it mercilessly with a heavy hammer, fold it over, and then plunge it into freezing cold water.
It's violent.
That violent, stressful process is what gives the blade its strength and its edge. That is exactly what life's harsh challenges, failures, and physical hardships do to a man's character.
But the challenge modern men face isn't always the physical hardship of a battlefield or a frontier. More often, it's the insidious, invisible threat of materialism and digital escapism.
The digital matrix.
This is where Riker's cultural critique becomes incredibly sharp. He points out that the modern attention economy is literally designed around keeping men docile and distracted. The numbers on this are utterly terrifying. Riker cites a 2022 Statista report showing that the average man spends over 2 hours a day on social media.
When you compound that, it translates to 730 hours a year.
Just let that sink in for a moment. 730 hours.
That is roughly an entire month of your waking life every single year gone.
Evaporated.
Think about what a man could build with 730 hours. That's enough time to learn 2 foreign languages. It's enough time to rebuild a car engine, get into the best physical shape of your life, start a profitable side business, or read 50 books.
But instead,
millions of men are spending those 730 hours watching other guys argue about politics in a grocery store parking lot on Twitter, or swiping through curated fake lives on Instagram.
if we connect this to the bigger picture, Riker argues that this isn't just a benign accident of technology. He asserts that the algorithms driving this digital materialism are deliberately designed to keep men scrolling, distracted, atomized, and constantly doubting themselves.
It's a pacification program.
Exactly. Every minute you spend engaged in pointless online outrage is a minute you aren't building your own life or leading your family. The digital world is engineered to harvest your raw masculine energy, your desire to conquer, your desire for justice, your desire for connection, and turn it into cheap dopamine and ad revenue for tech conglomerates.
And if you do decide to step out of that digital matrix, if you put down the phone and assert your traditional masculinity in the real world, there are real consequences. Riker doesn't sugarcoat this at all.
No, the pushback is fierce.
He shares a very real, very modern story about a small business owner. This guy was just living his life, running his shop, and he posted a completely harmless pro-masculinity meme on his personal social media account. It wasn't hateful, didn't attack anyone. It just expressed a traditional viewpoint on fatherhood and protecting the family.
And the response from the culture was immediate and disproportionately brutal.
He received death threats. He was doxxed, meaning his home address and personal information were broadcast to online mobs. His local business was targeted with fake reviews, and he was ultimately forced to shut down his accounts to protect his family.
Canceled over a meme.
Riker shares this story not to terrify the reader into submission, but to highlight the very real modern battles men face. The hostility to traditional men isn't some abstract conspiracy theory discussed on podcasts. It has real-world, economic, and social consequences. Standing up for these values comes with a cost.
And facing that kind of digital and cultural blowback brings up a glaring vulnerability for modern men. They are trying to fight this battle completely alone.
Which leads into Riker's exploration of brotherhood and the importance of community.
Because if you are going to face a culture that actively wants to cancel you, you simply cannot survive in isolation. Riker identifies what he calls a silent epidemic of isolation among modern men. He traces this back to the systemic destruction of traditional male spaces.
Sociologists call it the loss of the third place. We have home, we have work, but we used to have a vibrant third place. We had fraternal organizations, lodges, local mechanics garages, bowling leagues, or even just the neighborhood bar where men actually do each other's names.
Real physical spaces.
These were spaces where men could gather, uncensored, to share wisdom, vent their frustrations, hold each other accountable, and build deep camaraderie away from the immediate pressures of providing for their families or dealing with corporate HR departments.
So those are mostly gone now.
Over the last 50 years, those physical spaces have been largely decimated by modern urbanization, the digital shift, and cultural changes that view exclusive male spaces with deep suspicion.
And because of that loss, we are left with a profoundly tragic paradox. We are living in an era of hyper-connectivity through our smartphones and social networks, but men are suffering from severe, debilitating isolation in their actual souls.
The data supports this too.
Absolutely. Riker cites very sobering, alarming research from the American Psychological Association that links this specific male isolation directly to the skyrocketing rates of clinical depression, substance abuse, and suicide among men. Without a physical tribe, without a brotherhood to hold them accountable and provide a safety net of support, men simply wither and die. We are pack animals, not solitary creatures.
He illustrates this tragic reality with a heartbreaking anecdote about another man named John. This John is a 35-year-old software engineer. On paper, according to the metrics of modern society, he has won the game.
He's living the dream.
He pulls in a massive six-figure salary, he lives in a luxury apartment in a major city, he drives a nice car, and he has a career that everyone tells him he should be proud of. But at a men's retreat, surrounded by strangers, the facade cracks. He breaks down and confesses that he literally has no one in his life to talk to.
Tragic.
He has colleagues, he has followers online, but he has no real friends, no one who actually knows his struggles. His material success is completely hollow because it is experienced in total crushing isolation.
Riker contrasts that tragic, wealthy isolation with the transformative power of real-world mentorship. He tells the story of another young man who was raised by a single parent. This kid had no compass. He had no blueprint for how to navigate the world as a man, how to handle his own aggression, or how to treat women with respect while maintaining his own boundaries.
He was a statistic waiting to happen.
He was statistically destined for failure. But he was lucky enough to find a mentor, an older, grounded man in his community who took him under his wing. This mentor didn't just give him a book, he spent time with him. He taught him the value of extreme discipline, hard manual work, and traditional virtues.
Thanks to that real-world, face-to-face intervention, that young man completely transformed his life's trajectory. He avoided the pitfalls of his peers, became a thriving, self-made entrepreneur, and most importantly, a dedicated present father to his own children. It beautifully proves Riker's point that the chain of masculine wisdom has to be passed down person to person, hand to hand.
You cannot learn how to be a man from a TikTok video or a self-help blog.
Which is exactly why Riker strongly advocates for men to actively seek out and join faith-based brotherhoods or local physical organizations.
He specifically mentions groups like the Promise Keepers, or really any face-to-face community where men gather around a shared, higher spiritual purpose.
Real human connection.
He argues that taking the initiative to join these groups, to step out of your comfort zone and shake another man's hand, is the ultimate rebellion against the isolating digital matrix. In these spaces, you build genuine resilience. You share your struggles with pornography, your marriage issues, or your career doubts without any fear of being labeled toxic or being reported to HR. You reclaim a collective sense of purpose.
It's about building an impenetrable fortress. When men unite around shared values, historical wisdom, and deep spiritual discipline, they become entirely immune to the cultural gaslighting that tells them they are the problem. They remind each other of their divine worth, their biological imperatives, and their heavy, glorious responsibilities.
Which brings us to synthesizing the ultimate overarching takeaway from prayer and power.
Yeah, let's tie it all together.
Riker has basically laid out a comprehensive survival guide and a tactical roadmap for reclamation. He is looking the modern man dead in the eye and telling him to absolutely reject the victimhood narrative that society wants to force on him.
Take ownership.
He is urging men to fiercely guard their time, to step away from the digital distractions that are siphoning their energy and their potential. And most importantly, he is giving men the intellectual and spiritual permission to use active, intentional prayer to reclaim their rightful biological and divine role as protectors and leaders in a cultural landscape that is undeniably hostile to those very concepts.
It is a phenomenal, uncompromising message. Riker isn't asking for permission from the culture. He is giving men the blueprint to build a culture of their own.
And it leaves us with a final, provocative thought to mull over. Building on Riker's foundational work, but looking just a bit further over the horizon.
Lay it on us.
If, as the author meticulously suggests, our current digital world, social media, modern entertainment, the 24-hour news cycle, is actively engineered to isolate and neuter male ambition today, what happens in the next decade?
That's a scary thought.
What happens as artificial intelligence, hyper-realistic pornography, and fully immersive virtual reality become completely indistinguishable from daily physical life? As the digital matrix deepens and becomes even more seductive, will the ultimate, most radical act of masculine rebellion simply be logging off entirely, completely rejecting the digital illusion and returning permanently to the physical, material world to build real things with real brothers.
That is a phenomenal question to chew on, and it perfectly encapsulates the incredibly high stakes of what Conrad Reicher is talking about in this book. If you want to dive deep into this transformative roadmap for yourself, to master these concepts and to understand exactly how to build that physical and spiritual resilience, we highly encourage you to check out Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books right now to buy your copy of Prayer and Power, Rebuilding Masculine Leadership in a Feminized World.
And to keep up with the author's ongoing work, to see how he continues to develop these theories and address the very questions we just raised, make sure you follow at Conrad Reicher at Substack.
Absolutely, it is essential reading. Thank you so much for joining us on this exploration today. We covered a massive amount of ground, from ancient Gnosticism to modern algorithmic control. And to you, the listener, before you go, please remind yourself to hit that like button and subscribe to the show so you can join us for the very next deep dive. Stay strong, stay curious, log off when you need to, and we will see you next time.